The themes were then reviewed to ascertain whether the themes represented the article analyzed, as well as to ensure no potential important themes were missed. And the naming for these themes were intended to create an understandable name for each theme. For example, designing for accessibility as a major theme was quite simple and broad, but it encompassed sub-themes such as universal inclusive design, which I will then dive to in my next slide. Okay, so this is just a screen showing the previous or depicting the previous slide where I discussed the themes. So 4 emergent themes, obviously shown in table 1, were identified during the analysis of the literature, and they are success factors for adopting e-government, designing and accessibility, assistive technology, and evaluation of accessibility and usability of the websites. And all of these produce these sub-themes that you see on the right-hand side. Okay, so theme 1. Theme 1 is the success factors for adopting e-government. The 5 success factors, or the 5 sub-themes identified as key to a successful adoption of e-government, are obviously the economic, organizational, socio-cultural, end user, as well as policy and strategy. And several studies have noted that the need for readily available resources for implementation of an accessible e-government. Yet many e-government systems lack adequate resources. For example, access to information technology experts, as well as knowledge workers involved in the designing and implementation of e-government services is important. And this remains one of the most consistent organizational challenges in most public institutions. Another consistent challenge is the financial resource mismanagement and the inadequate financial and human resources, which all contribute towards poor service delivery for government services. So, for example, or for instance, in South Africa, the implementation of e-government services faces multiple challenges due to the decentralization of e-government funding. Access to financial resources is seen to be limited for public actors, and there's a perception that designing for accessibility is cost intensive and therefore not given the priority during the design implementation. If we look at the second theme, designing for accessibility, this is probably the theme that I've gone through the most with regards to the findings. And several researchers now advocate for universal and inclusive design as a potential means for addressing accessibility challenges during design phase. So this is based on the premise that universal design begins with considering all users to develop products that are accessible and usable by all people regardless of their ability. And inclusive design focuses on providing a full range of human diversity and intends to provide access to as many citizens as possible. So universal design is guided by some key principles of equitability, flexibility, ease of use, access, and tolerance of errors. With these principles, designers and developers, as well as practitioners, would be able to be well guided in developing inclusive solutions for consumers, regardless of any impairment. So, cooperation of e-government actors. E-government systems are very complex and require participation of several agents to arrive at a successful implementation. And close coordination and collaboration between these agents are important for having a successful e-government implementation. It has been noted that this collaboration is very minimal during the initial design and implementation process, and e-government projects could be the source for, this could be the source for e-government projects not meeting their intended goals and objectives. There are calls for top management to collaborate with all stakeholders, specifically the design team and development team, as well as a people with disabilities interest group, to ensure focus on developing systems that are accessible to all users. The number of people involved in decision-making could potentially lead to achievement of a successful implementation of e-government and ultimately achieve the sustainable development goals. Another interesting point is the design team demographics, or design and development team demographics. It has been pointed out that it's important to note that the demographics of the team may influence the usability and accessibility of the products or services being created. A diverse group of people will generally have more members who are sensitive to at least some form of accessibility issues. And there's a greater likelihood that there will be an improvement in providing inclusivity in designing a wider array of design, if a wider array of design team members are working together. So designers of web interfaces can create an engagement between interfaces and users, and far too often design decisions taken have negatively impacted people with disabilities in their use of web and mobile interfaces. Biased design of interfaces negatively affects users as well in those with lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And to avoid exclusion, when designing for accessibility, diversity must be assumed to be the norm, because without diversity, there may be knowledge redundancy within the team. Knowledge information.
2 minutes.
Yes.
2 minutes.
2 minutes left.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Okay, so I will just move on to the next slide, which is the assistive technologies. There is a need for readily available and cost-effective, easy to use, and compatible to activities that people engage with. However, the challenges are not adapted to or compatible with the technologies being used. And then the fourth finding was evaluation and usability. And the biggest outcome of this was periodic monitoring of e-government websites for accessibility. If I just go to my conclusion, the purpose of the study was to document the current literature on accessibility of e-government websites with respect to people with disabilities. The study followed a descriptive literature synthesis on the phenomenon, and from that, the 4 themes were identified. Firstly, the success factors for e-government adoption, and then the second factor being the designing for accessible e-government systems. While these studies presented a foundational basis of what to consider when implementing e-government, these studies fail to engage and consider people with disabilities' needs for accessibility. The third theme obviously being assistive technologies, and the biggest one was focusing on readily available assistive technologies that are cost effective. And the final theme was on the research focusing on evaluation of websites. The study has a limitation on the sampling. Keywords that were used for the data collection can be expanded on beyond the keywords of e-government and accessibilities, e-government and persons with disabilities, which might not reveal all papers related due to disabilities. Further focusing on a specific disability, because each disability has its own specificities and should be studied individually, is another limitation. These findings show that the design and implementation of accessible e-government systems are done in a fragmented manner with limited cooperation amongst researchers and the numerous stakeholders involved. By tackling issues around the design of e-government systems collectively, we can contribute towards a better understanding of how these systems can be better designed for inclusivity purposes. Thank you.
Great, well done. Thanks, Saleem. Sorry you had to rush it at the end there.